When you get a cold or an allergy,
You need some herbal tea.
you also get a lot of advice.
What you want to do is feed a cold.
A lot of advice.
Take Judy to call me in the morning.
But the best advice is what doctors have said millions of times. Take Dimetap. Dimetap in non-prescription formulas brings proven relief. So take the advice of doctors and pharmacists.
The tea work. Huh?
And take Dimetap. The best advice you can take.
Life without cholesterol. Give up the best things in life. What's left?
New Miracle Whip cholesterol-free dressing. Now you get all the taste of regular Miracle Whip and absolutely no cholesterol.
I do?
New Miracle Whip cholesterol-free. Now the best things in life are cholesterol-free.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And now see the light. Miracle Whip Light's cholesterol-free.
Watch it. Wet. Baywatch, Friday.
Thursday on Cosby, Theo's singing the blues about his problems at school. And the newest Cosby kid belts out a tune of her own.
Shake it up, baby.
Thursday.
Good evening once again from the streets of San Francisco. It is so unusual to be in this festive city, essentially in the dark of night. But those are the consequences of this enormous earthquake that struck here last night. Power has been shut off, especially in this area, the Marina District, and that fire truck is pumping some additional water on the smoldering ruins from that big fire that we saw in an apartment complex last night. Still, the city is starting to make a comeback. The most severe damage in this 4 square mile area. Throughout the rest of the city, not that much structural damage, but a lot of things are broken. Phones and traffic lights and other kinds of utilities. They're slowly beginning to come back, and NBC's Don Oliver has that story tonight.
There were plenty of reminders for San Franciscans of the shaking they'd gone through, some gentle and some not so gentle. In most of the city, there was only the prospect of cleaning up broken glass. Tomorrow, a beautiful, sunshiny day. The tall buildings had weathered the quake with few visible signs. Electricity in the heart of the city was still out. Traffic was generally light, as a number of commuters followed the advice of the mayor and stayed away from work. Many just couldn't have made it to the city, as engineers closed the bridges to the south for close inspection. With the exception of the damaged Oakland Bay Bridge, all of the inspected bridges were later reopened.
Please leave the area now!
Crowd control was a problem in the one area of San Francisco that was dealt a severe blow by the quake. It's known as the Marina, a strip of high-priced homes and apartments near the bay and the Golden Gate Bridge.
I thought that my floor was just going to cave in. Everything, I have a heavy piano that moves like 3 or 4 feet from the wall, and everything's off all the shelves and table, everything's on the floor.
As many as 30 homes in this area were damaged so badly, they will have to be torn down. Among those looking over the damage in the Marina, Vice President Quayle, who promised local officials as much federal help as the law allows. But many here were more interested in getting back into their homes. Some had been ordered not to, pending damage inspection.
They won't let us go back. We need to go back. My baby needs a diaper change, and he needs some food.
Some of those living in buildings extensively damaged ignored the orders and the warnings and went back in to retrieve their possessions. They feared that a large aftershock might cause the buildings to collapse.
And of course I had all my valuables and no earthquake insurance, and so we all foolishly went into the building and gathered our belongings, which are here on the street.
Did you get permission at all to go in, or you just...
No, we just took a chance.
One of the worst jobs is still ahead, removing the rubble to determine if there are any bodies in the splintered remains of the Marina homes. Officials say they know there are 2 dead in this building, but until they get heavy equipment, they say it is too dangerous to attempt to remove them. Despite the damage and death here, city officials believe San Francisco coped well with the big quake.
We have been planning for it for years and years. So it's like an exercise to us. We're doing what we've been trained to do.
Many stores remained closed because of the lack of electricity, so some food was handed out at a disaster relief center. And some people decided they wouldn't drink the city water, despite the contention of officials that it is pure and safe. But all in all, San Francisco seems to be taking the quake of '89 pretty much in stride.
The city has adapted remarkably well, although the police radio tonight, as I was listening to it, had scores of calls of broken or leaking gas mains and lines in homes, and that, of course, is a major continuing concern. Don Oliver, you're there in the heart of the city tonight. What do they think about the absolute repair of utilities to this city?
It's going to take probably a week to 2 weeks before they are able to check the entire infrastructure of the city. Most of the city, as I mentioned in the story, was not really that drastically affected by the earthquake, but they have to be sure. They have to know that all of the oil lines and the gas lines and the electric lines are secure. They also have to check all of the high-rise buildings to make sure that the wiring is still secure, and that is going to take time, Tom.
And I would think, Don, this is a very popular destination city, of course, for tourists, that prudence would dictate that they try to call ahead to see if their hotel has, in fact, operating elevators and whether they can get around as they might expect to. Wouldn't you agree?
That is absolutely the case. However, tonight, 24 hours after the quake, there are hotels now with their elevators operating that weren't operating this morning. The traffic signals are back in operation in the streets, and some of the restaurants and bars have begun to open up again.
All right, well, that's good news for a city like San Francisco. NBC's George Lewis is just across the bay where the most dramatic story of the night is going on. We want to take you through now the most damaged areas of the Bay Area, beginning with Interstate 880. A mile-long section collapsed. It looks like a concrete sandwich. Unfortunately, beneath those slabs of concrete and steel are cars. No one knows for sure how many altogether, maybe as many as 200. It's a popular off-ramp from the Oakland Bay Bridge, and a lot of commuters going from San Francisco to East Oakland were on the bridge at 5:04 Pacific time, the peak of the rush hour, when it came down. Some have been recovered, but a lot have been killed. This is the Oakland Bay Bridge, the span that collapsed. They do think that it'll take about 3 weeks to get that repaired. There was some discussion about making some temporary repairs to that. And this is where I'm standing tonight, daylight footage of the Marina District. As you can see, these elegant homes, many of them built in the 1920s on what is essentially landfill, took a very severe hit. The area has been effectively evacuated tonight, principally because of structural damage and because of leaking gas lines as well. Incidentally, this is the neighborhood of Jolton Joe DiMaggio. He came by, took a look at his house, but he's not able to live there tonight either. And in downtown San Francisco, in the Union Square area, you'll see that I. Magnin has shattered windows. Some tourists were pretty severely cut yesterday when that happened. That's a very popular area, of course, for pedestrian traffic. It's right in the heart of the city, and yet the high-rises of San Francisco did hold together. In fact, there's been very little structural damage to those buildings that have been constructed here in the last 15 or 20 years or so. We do want to go to the most dramatic story of the night, however, and that is Interstate 880, just across the bay, leading off the Oakland Bay Bridge. NBC's George Lewis has been there all day long. George?
Tom, some dramatic developments indeed tonight. After saying all day long, the authorities were saying that perhaps nobody remained alive. Earlier this evening, they announced that they have found someone alive back there in the rubble in the dark behind me. There's a crane working back there to try to free the person who they say is trapped in a car there. They don't know if it's a man or a woman yet. They reacted to noises earlier. The authorities were hearing noises. They checked it out. And they say, indeed, there is someone alive back there. So that's going to give new hope to many of the relatives who've been waiting around here all day for news of the missing persons. More than 80 missing persons reported in Oakland alone, many of them believed trapped beneath the rubble of this bridge. The authorities still believe that practically everyone who was crushed in that two-layer bridge is dead. But this is a startling new development tonight, Tom.
George, and the fact of the matter is that a lot of these relatives don't know for sure whether their loved ones were on the bridge or on the off-ramp at the time. They would only know if they didn't appear at home, right?
That's right. One man we talked to earlier today thought his son was taking this route home, and he would have been traveling through this area a little after 5 the time the earthquake hit. So he suspects that his son is among the missing people and perhaps crushed in this rubble. And when we talked to him earlier today, he was very frustrated at the slow pace of the rescue efforts. The people running this operation say they can't put a lot of people up there on that freeway structure right now because it's in very fragile condition. Any earthquake aftershocks could further topple it. They don't want further loss of life, so they've been keeping the rescue effort very restrained and saying all along that nobody was alive there, so it wasn't important to rush. Now that equation may have been changed a little bit by this new discovery tonight.
This is a heavyweight game of pickup sticks, and of course the consequences are considerable because the wrong shift in that freeway could bring even more death, not just to the people who are trapped, but to the rescuers as well. So they do have to do it with great care. We have seen that in Mexico City and Armenia and around the world. A 7.0 earthquake on the Richter scale. That's a very powerful one, probably the second most powerful earthquake to hit a major populated area in this country in this century. Yet, most of the buildings were able to withstand it. Why? Because of the new California construction codes. NBC's Stan Bernard tonight on all of that.
The earth moved in waves, some said like a rolling ocean. As it moved across metropolitan San Francisco and Oakland, it hit randomly and hardest where the city was most vulnerable. In the Marina area, a section of the city built on land that had been filled in back in the early 1900s, the shifting of the earth was violent enough to collapse 3-story structures down to 1. Many of these buildings are of wood frame construction. Gas lines ruptured, a fire broke out, and were fed by the gas and the wood. Scores of buildings were consumed, and others, some say up to 100, will have to be torn down because they are so badly damaged or have just shifted so severely on their foundations. They are now even more vulnerable to aftershocks. Why were some areas hit so hard and others almost untouched? Dr. Ian Buckle of the National Center for Earthquake Engineering Research.
California has been preparing, if that's the right word, for this event for 50 years in the sense that they have had in the building codes and in the bridge codes the design provisions for seismic loads.
No building codes here. Spitak in Soviet Armenia. And the earthquake was the same size, 6.9 on the Richter scale, as the California quake. This was mostly new construction, but it was all prefabricated concrete with insufficient steel support. 25,000 people died in Spitak and Leninakan. As the California earthquake rolled out last evening, it did not damage the Golden Gate Bridge. Dr. Buckle said that bridge is anchored on stone, both at its ends and its center supports. But another bridge did come apart, the Oakland Bay Bridge.
But when those structures were built, engineers did not appreciate the demand that an earthquake causes for deflection requirements, that if we have a bridge span sitting on a pier and the ground starts to move, the pier starts to move, and still staying within its strength properties, it can move so far that the span drops and we have a girder being unseated. And this is what happened in the Bay Bridge last evening.
The approaches to the bridge, Highway 880, a 2-level structure, became a death trap for more than 250 people. Experts say the contributing cause here could have been the same as at the Marina area: landfill, bad soil conditions, shifting under the foundations for the highway. The highway rolled like the quake under it, and the upper roadway collapsed with a domino effect, with at least 100 cars crushed between the 2 levels. One earthquake specialist said one way to avoid such a catastrophe is a kind of highway circuit breaker, one weak collapsible link to save the rest. Either that or build stronger and more expensively. Stronger and more costly construction is what saved most of San Francisco last night. Stan Bernard, NBC News.
One of the leading authorities in the country on earthquake construction and the damage that earthquakes can cause is Dr. Fred Krimgold of Virginia Tech. He's a professor of architecture there. We talked to him last night from Washington, D.C. He flew out here overnight and he has been inspecting this area. He is now very near Interstate 880. Mr. Krimgold, tell me about Interstate 880. I think in the 1970s they went in there to repair that, to bring it up to code. What happened?
Well, it's not apparent here. The failure along the length of the freeway is at the same point, just at the change in profile of the